Imagine you are a farmer in rural France. The year is 1600. You wake before sunrise, the frost hasn't lifted yet, and you have maybe 40 years left if you're lucky, and a bad winter could take 10 of those. You have a wife, children, land that needs breaking, a season that doesn't care about your feelings. Now imagine someone rides up to your fence and asks, "But what is your purpose?" You would think they were insane. And you know what? You'd be right. Because that question, the question that has spawned an entire multi-billion-dollar industry of gurus and journals and breathwork retreats, is not a deep question. It's a sick one. And I want to talk about where it came from. Because for most of human history, purpose wasn't something you found. It was something you were handed. You were born into a village, a caste, a trade, a faith. Your father was a blacksmith, so you were a blacksmith. Your mother ground grain, so you ground grain. The meaning wasn't hidden inside you, waiting to be excavated by a weekend retreat. It was external, communal, inherited. The cosmos had a shape, and you had a place in it. Done. No podcast required. Then the Industrial Revolution happened, and it didn't just change how people worked. It demolished the entire architecture of inherited meaning. Suddenly you weren't a blacksmith's son anymore. You were a unit of labor, interchangeable, replaceable. The village was gone. The guild was gone. The cosmic order your great-grandparents took for granted was gone. And into that void, that howling, terrifying void where meaning used to live, the modern self was born, anxious, unmoored, desperately searching for something to be. Here's the thing about pre-industrial life that nobody in the self-help section wants to confront. It was hard, genuinely, physically, brutally hard. You hunted, you planted, you built, you preserved, you repaired, and then you started over. The cycle of seasons wasn't a metaphor. It was your entire cognitive universe. Plant in spring, tend in summer, harvest before the frost, survive the winter, repeat until you die. And embedded in that cycle, woven into the very structure of the work, was something that looked a lot like meaning. Not because anyone sat down and decided it was meaningful, but because it had to be done, and you were the one doing it. That's it. That was enough. Think about what it means to make fire from nothing. You gather the wood, specific wood, the right dryness, the right density. You prepare the tinder. You create friction. You nurse a spark into a flame, into something that feeds your family tonight. Every step demands your entire attention. Your body knows what to do. Your hands know. There is no gap between you and the task. No space where existential dread can crawl in and whisper, "But is this your true calling?" The doing was the answer. The body in motion, solving real problems, producing real results, that WAS purpose. Felt in the muscles, never questioned. And here's the first thing I want you to hold on to. The first open loop I'm leaving you with. What happens to a human animal when you remove that loop? When the body no longer has to solve for survival? Because here's what the pre-industrial human had that we don't. Two things. First, external scaffolding. The village, the guild, the church, the harvest calendar. These were meaning structures. They told you what mattered and when and why. You didn't have to invent it, you were born into it. Second, a body that was perpetually, relentlessly USED. Not in a gym for 45 minutes before you go sit in a chair for 10 hours. Actually used, depleted, called upon. The body that works hard enough to be tired has a much harder time asking, "But what's the point?" And those two things, the external structure and the embodied exhaustion, they vanish together at roughly the same historical moment. Which brings me to the second open loop. WHY then. Why did the purpose crisis emerge? When it did? What specifically broke? We'll get there. So let me answer the first open loop I left you with. What happens when you remove the effort-result circuit from a human life? First, you need to understand what that circuit actually is, because it's not a metaphor, it's a neurological mechanism. When you exert effort and produce a tangible result, your brain closes a loop. Dopamine is released, not as a reward for being happy, but as a signal that says what you just did mattered. The effort was real. The outcome is real. The world changed because of you. That signal, fired reliably, consistently, is what we experience as felt meaning. Not the idea of meaning, the feeling of it. Deep in the body, pre-verbal, ancient, and modern life has systematically, almost surgically dismantled it. Take office work. You sit down at a desk. You open a laptop. You attend meetings. You write emails that prompt meetings about the emails. You update a spreadsheet. You produce a slide deck that goes into a folder that no one opens again. You work from 9 to 6, and at the end of the day, you stand up and look around, and nothing has changed. No object exists that didn't exist before. No structure was built. No crop was harvested. You have produced, as far as your ancient mammal brain can determine, absolutely nothing. The effort went in. The feedback loop never closed. and your nervous system registers this as a low-grade emergency. Not a crisis, just a constant, unignorable hum. Something is wrong, something is missing. You just can't name it. Here's the neurochemistry, because I want you to understand this isn't a personality flaw. The brain's reward architecture evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to respond to physical, visible, causal feedback. You throw the spear, the animal falls. Dopamine, you plant the seed, the shoot emerges. Dopamine, you build the wall stands. Dopamine, the signal requires what neuroscientists call a completion cue, a sensory, often physical confirmation that effort produced outcome. Without it, the dopaminergic system doesn't fully fire, it idles. And an idling reward system doesn't feel like nothing. It feels like hollowness, like you're running an engine in neutral, burning fuel, going nowhere, and somehow that's worse than being stopped. Digital work makes this worse, because the screen is an abstraction layer between you and everything you do. You click. Something happens somewhere on a server you'll never see, in a database you'll never touch, affecting a number in a report someone might read next quarter. The causality exists. It's just invisible, mediated, delayed to the point of being undetectable by any sensory system you actually have. You are a human animal operating a control panel for a process happening entirely out of your perceptual reach. And the cruelest part? The work can be genuinely important. You can be moving real money, affecting real people, making real decisions, and your nervous system will still register it as nothing. Because it felt like nothing. Your hands never knew. Service work is a different flavor of the same problem. You are a nurse. You care for a patient all night, monitoring, adjusting, responding, reassuring. It is exhausting, skilled, critical work. And then your shift ends and the patient is the same, or maybe slightly better, or maybe worse, and the ward looks exactly as it did when you arrived. Your effort produced a maintained state, a thing that didn't deteriorate as fast as it might have without you. How do you feel that? How does your ancient reward system close the loop on preventing a thing that didn't happen? The answer is, it struggles enormously, and we call the result burnout. And then we tell the nurse to practice more self-care, which is obscene. And this produces what I think is one of the defining psychological experiences of modern life. The sensation of being perpetually busy while feeling completely empty. You are not lazy. You are not ungrateful. You are not broken. You have simply been working in conditions that your nervous system cannot metabolize as meaningful. High activity. Zero felt progress. The calendar is full. The to-do list never ends. The notifications never stop. And at the end of each day, there is this low, persistent ache. Not grief exactly, not depression exactly, something more like static, like a signal that has everything except the message. You burned the hours. Where did they go? What did they build? You can't point to it. You can't hold it. It doesn't exist in any form your hands would recognize. Now here's where I want to bring in something that sounds almost too simple to be the answer, but isn't. The body is not a vehicle for the brain. The body, I, is the brain's primary interface with reality. The proprioceptive system, the musculoskeletal feedback, the felt sense of exertion and completion. These are not decorative features of human experience. They are the mechanism through which meaning gets registered, not thought about, registered. The difference between knowing intellectually that your work matters and feeling that it does is almost entirely a function of whether the body was involved in producing it. And modern knowledge work has almost completely excised the body from the equation. We have outsourced effort to our fingertips. And then we wonder why we feel like ghosts in our own lives. When the feedback loop stays open, when effort goes out and no sensory confirmation comes back, the brain doesn't just shrug and move on. It activates the default mode network. Rumination kicks in. The mind starts looping through unresolved questions, incomplete tasks, unclear outcomes, not as a malfunction, but as a feature. The brain is trying to close the open loop by thinking its way to the resolution it couldn't get through action. But you can't think your way to the felt sense of completion. You can only do your way there. And so the rumination compounds, the anxiety builds, the hollow feeling deepens. People call therapists. Therapists diagnose mood disorders, prescribe medications that target the very neurotransmitter systems the work itself was supposed to be activating. And the job is still there. Monday morning, same desk, same screen, same open loop. Now, Here's where I want to dismantle something at the root level. Not the feeling of purposelessness. That's real, we've established that. I want to dismantle the solution the culture keeps handing you for it. 3 words. Find your purpose. Find your purpose. And I need you to look at that verb because it is doing an enormous amount of ideological damage. Find, as in the thing already exists. As in it is somewhere. As in your job is to locate it. The entire framework presupposes that purpose is a hidden object. Something buried inside you like a gemstone in a mine. And the reason you feel empty is simply that you haven't dug deep enough yet. That is a philosophical claim, a significant one. And it is almost certainly wrong. Think about what the archaeological model of purpose actually implies. It says, you have a true self. That true self has a true calling. The calling was there before you started looking, fixed, essential, waiting. Your life, therefore, is essentially a search operation. And the question, what is my purpose, is just the adult version of asking where the treasure is buried. Now here's the thing about treasure maps. Someone drew them. Someone profits when you believe the treasure is real. And the self-help industry, the journals, the retreats, the coaches, the 12-step frameworks for discovering your authentic passion has every financial incentive to keep you convinced the treasure exists and just slightly out of reach. Because a person who has found their purpose stops buying the books. A person still searching? That's a customer for life. And here is what the Find Your Purpose framework DOES to people in practice. It creates paralysis. Because if purpose is a thing to be discovered, then the correct response to not having found it yet is to keep searching. To wait. To not commit to anything until the revelation arrives. Because committing to the wrong path might take you further from the right one. I have watched brilliant, capable people spend their 30s waiting for a calling that never came. Not because they lack passion or depth or intelligence, but because they had accepted a model of themselves as a person-shaped hole waiting to be filled by the correct purpose. And the model itself was the prison. They weren't lost. They were standing still in a framework that made standing still feel like wisdom. Let me say something that will make certain people uncomfortable. The existential anxiety of, I don't know my purpose is, in the most precise sense of the word, a luxury. Not a small luxury, a historically unprecedented luxury. One that requires, as a precondition, that your survival needs are already met. You cannot ask, what is the meaning of my life, when the question in front of you is, will my children eat this winter? You cannot pursue authentic passion when you're working 16 hours a day in a cotton mill at age 11. The purpose crisis is the crisis of affluence, of enough. Of a world where the body's survival demands have been largely outsourced to institutions, and the freed up cognitive space, the space that used to be filled by survival, is now an empty room your brain cannot tolerate. There's a version of this insight that lives in psychology, in what researchers call the Maslow hierarchy, the idea that once lower needs are met, higher needs emerge. But here's what Maslow didn't tell you, and what the self-help industry definitely won't. Higher needs aren't automatically ennobling. A brain freed from survival anxiety doesn't naturally ascend to wisdom and purpose. It looks for problems, because that's what it does. That's what it evolved to do. And if there are no predators to track and no harvest to plan, it will find threats in relationships, in status, in the mirror, in the future, or it will manufacture the most sophisticated anxiety available to an educated modern person. The dread of living an unlived life, of dying without having found the thing you were supposed to be. That's not enlightenment. That's a nervous system running its threat detection software with nothing real to detect. And here's the thing that should stop you cold. Pre-industrial humans, the farmers, the smiths, the weavers, the hunters, they didn't ask. They didn't ask, what is my purpose? Not once. Not as a class of people, not as a cultural phenomenon, not as a question worth posing. It is not in their diaries, not in their letters, not in their philosophy. The question didn't exist in that form because the conditions that generate the question didn't exist. They were too busy being alive, too embedded in real, physical, consequential work, too surrounded by community that needed them in specific, irreplaceable ways. The purpose question is not ancient wisdom. It is not the deepest question a human can ask. It is a symptom of a very specific historical wound. And treating the symptom as if it were a fundamental feature of the human condition is one of the more expensive mistakes a culture can make. Because make no mistake, there is an industry built entirely on your inability to answer this question. $11 billion a year in the United States alone. Books, courses, retreats, life coaches, ikigai diagrams, passion frameworks, the 4-hour work week, the subtle art of not giving a whatever. All of it premised on the same hidden guarantee that you don't have it yet, that you need their method to get it, and that once you pay and do the work, you might finally feel it. And here's the tell. Here's how you know the whole architecture is rotten. The books never end. The industry never closes. After decades of this cultural conversation about finding purpose, more people report feeling purposeless than ever before. The cure keeps failing. The disease keeps spreading. And somehow the solution being offered is always more searching. More worksheets, more retreats, never less. That should tell you something. And even for the people who find something that feels like purpose, a career, a cause, a calling, there's a dirty secret the gurus skip over. The feeling doesn't stay. Passion is not a steady state. It's a spike. It arrives in moments. When the work is new, when the challenge is calibrated, when you're in flow, and then it fades. Routine sets in. The novelty compresses. And suddenly the thing you thought was your purpose feels like a job. And the people who built their identity on having found the answer are now faced with something worse than not having found it. They found it, they committed to it, and now it's gone cold. So they start searching again for the next thing. The better fit, the truer calling, and the cycle repeats. Not because they're broken, but because the framework is broken. Passion is a byproduct. You can't make it the destination. But here is where I'm going to stop tearing things down, because that's the easy part, and I'm aware of it. Dismantling the bad answer is satisfying, but not sufficient. So let me give you what I think is the honest, harder, better answer. And it starts with this. Everything I just said about pre-industrial humans, about the feedback loop, about the body in motion, about meaning being felt rather than found, that's not an argument for going back. You can't go back. It's an argument for understanding what the feedback loop actually requires, and then deliberately, consciously, intelligently rebuilding it inside the conditions you actually live in. Purpose isn't found. It never was. It was always constructed. The pre-industrial humans didn't find their purpose either. It was built into their conditions. Your conditions don't build it for you anymore, so you have to. That's the shift. The constructive model of purpose looks nothing like the discovery model. It doesn't ask, what were you made to do? It asks, what are you willing to do repeatedly? Badly at first, then better, then well. What is worth your sustained attention? Not because it always feels good, but because the doing of it produces something you can point to, hold, return to, improve. Purpose isn't a revelation, it's a residue. It's what accumulates when you show up consistently for work that has a visible output and a real standard. You don't feel it before you start. You feel it after, often long after. And even then, it's not a permanent state. It's a recurring one. Something that comes and goes as the work deepens. That's not a disappointment. That's actually the honest shape of a meaningful life. So let me be specific, because vague wisdom is just another product. Purpose is constructed through 3 mechanisms, and all 3 are available to you right now, regardless of your job, your circumstances, or how lost you currently feel. The first is engagement. Genuine, effortful, sustained engagement with something that pushes back. Not passive consumption, not scrolling, something that requires you to adapt. The second is craft. The deliberate attempt to get better at a specific thing over time, where better is measurable, where the feedback is real, where your hands or your mind can detect the improvement. And the third, the most underrated, is presence. Capacity to be actually here in this task, with this material right now, without one eye on whether this is the right task. Engagement, craft, presence, those 3 things applied anywhere generate what people mean when they say they feel purposeful, not as a discovery, as a consequence. Go back to the farmer. Rural France, 1600, frost on the ground, 40 years left if the winter doesn't take him. Remember how I framed him at the start? I said someone riding up to ask about his purpose would seem insane to him, and I implied he was right. But here's what I want you to see now that you couldn't see at the beginning. He wasn't protected from the question by ignorance. He wasn't too dumb to ask it, too simple, too unfree. He was protected from it by something real and specific. He had a body that was used. He had work that closed the loop. He had a community that needed him in ways he could see and touch and measure. The question couldn't get traction because the conditions that generate the question didn't exist. And now they do. For you. That's not his advantage over you. It's just the honest diagnosis. The question isn't a sign of depth. It's a sign of a gap. And gaps can be filled, not by searching, but by building. I left you with 2 open loops early on. The first, what happens to a human animal when you remove the effort? Result circuit? You know the answer now. The feedback loop goes dark. The brain idles in rumination. The body shows up, but the signal never arrives. You feel busy and empty at the same time. The second loop. Why did the purpose crisis emerge when it did? What specifically broke? That one you also know. It wasn't random. It was the Industrial Revolution, removing both things simultaneously. The external scaffolding of community and inherited role, and the embodied exhaustion of work that used the body. Those two losses, at the same historical moment, created the vacuum. And into that vacuum walked an $11 billion industry with worksheets and retreats. Those loops are closed. You don't have to keep holding them, but you do have to do something with what they contain. So here is the actual instruction, not the inspirational version, the mechanical one. Stop asking what your purpose is. The question is not answerable in advance, and trying to answer it keeps you stationary. Instead, pick something that produces a visible output. Something where done looks different from not done. Something your hands can participate in, literally or functionally. A garden, a piece of software, a piece of furniture, a piece of writing, a skill at a standard you haven't hit yet. Then put your attention into it. Not your hopes, not your identity, not the question of whether this is the right thing. Just your attention, fully, repeatedly, over time. The feeling of purpose is not a precondition for that process. It is the exhaust of that process. It comes out the back end after enough engaged hours. Not before. Never before. Anyone telling you otherwise is selling you something. The farmer in France didn't find his purpose. He just kept showing up. Every morning, frost or no frost, hands in the soil, eyes on the seasoned. He wasn't enlightened. He wasn't fulfilled in some continuous, radiant, guru-approved way. But something in his nervous system knew, at the end of each day, that the loop had closed, that the effort had landed somewhere real. That was enough. Not because the question had been answered, but because the conditions of his life left no room for the question to fester. Your conditions do leave room. That's the difference between you and him. Not intelligence, not depth, just the gap that comfort creates. So fill the gap. Not with searching, not with frameworks, not with the right journal or the right retreat. Fill it with your hands. Fill it with your attention. Do a thing, badly, then better. Make something that didn't exist before you made it. The feeling you're looking for isn't hiding. It's waiting on the other side of the work.